Hey, what's going on, folks? It's Mike here, and welcome to the next lesson in our software and design series, and I'm going to be talking about in C++ the observer pattern. Now, I've already talked about this in a previous video, so go ahead and check out that video. I'll go ahead and show it in a moment, but I want to go ahead and just pick up where we left off last time and talk about our observer pattern. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive in. So if you haven't seen the previous video, just go ahead and make sure that you check out on YouTube the latest design patterns, or the first part of this series here. So you can find it here or on courses.msha.io in the software design series. So with that said, though, let's go ahead and give a second try for our observer. Now, before we go ahead and try here, let's just go ahead and see where we left off in our previous lesson. So I've got the code here from our first try. So again, the basic idea was just to understand what the observer pattern is. We've got these objects, observers, that want to be notified anytime that a subject does something interesting. And our subject is adding those observers in this basic case. Now, of course, there's different ways to set up or implement observer, and there's many different variations, but this is just to get started. So again, let's just go ahead and start with the subject here. And we can see that the subject's responsible for, in this case, adding the observers, which we have here, removing the observers, or however you want to set this up, and notifying the observers when something interesting happens, which is again just iterating through all those observers in whatever data structure you're using. In this case, I chose a forward list, probably the simplest thing, to iterate through the order that the observers were added into, and just call their onNotify function. So we saw an example of this previously here, where I created a subject, 3 observers, they had different names so we could see them being used, added each of the observers, and then notified them. And then we tried this again by removing one of the observers here and running this. So I'll go ahead and run this here just so, again, you can see what happened here. And at this point, I don't really need any C++ specific version other than C++ 11 for the forward list. So I need to use at least 11, but in most of my series, I like 20 or later. And let's just go ahead and compile this main here and run it just so you can see where we left off. So you can see our subject can again notify all the observers. Now, where we left off with this, if I go ahead back here, is we kind of summarized, and this was me sort of giving you some of the ideas here. If I go back here, that this first iteration of our pattern had some pros and cons. You know, it's not really flexible. Maybe it's maintainable if this was the intent and you don't want other subscribers or publishers, another way to call this observer and subject pattern. And was it extensible? Not really. Again, if I wanted to create more observers and subjects, I have to create those different classes. So what we want to do is improve on this in our second implementation here. And again, we're going to keep progressively building up this observer pattern, but here's sort of our next step. And the next step is to actually look at pretty much any design patterns book in many different languages, and they should have some UML diagram like this. So just again, to sort of orient you what's going on here, is we're going to be adding an interface here, or that is making our subject more of an abstract class. Now again, in C++, we don't have abstract classes, so this is just going to be our base class. But I'll prefix it with an I just so you understand the idea that we just want to inherit from this class to give some functionality. So let me move away and just kind of highlight some of the important things in this figure here. So again, the ISubject is pretty much going to be exactly what we had as before here. We'll be able to attach or add, detach, or remove observers, and then we'll have some notify function. In this case, I've just called it notify all, which again iterates through all the observers that we added. So that's our base class here. And then when we want to create new classes, we can make them subjects. So things that would be observable by observers by just inheriting from this class here. So we'll derive a new class here. And we can add some extra power if we want, but for now, I'm just going to demonstrate creating a new derived class from the subject, and you'll see that we get this ability to attach, detach, or add and remove observers and notify all of them. And likewise for our IObserver, or our interface for our observer here, what we're going to do is have a onNotify that must be implemented. So if you need a little bit of review on this, I have some C++ videos, but when I say must be implemented, that means it's a purely virtual function in C++ lingo. So that's what we'll have there. So then the next thing that I'll demonstrate will be to create a concrete observer. And again, all I really mean there is I'm just going to inherit or derive a new class from our new interface here, and it will implement the onNotify function here. And again, we might want to add other power here on our update, like maybe being able to get the state or do other things to keep track of, has this observer been notified, or these sorts of things might be useful. But again, you can sort of add those as you need power. So that's the basic idea. So as far as the implementation goes, this is what I'm going to walk us through. I'll just go ahead and leave it on a slide here, but we're going to build this from scratch here in a moment, just so you can see some of the design decisions that go into this. So here's an example of our subject, again, creating this interface and then creating the new derived class here. And you'll see, again, I'm not adding too much functionality here, or rather I'm adding no functionality. Just so, again, you can see that we gain this extensibility from this pattern by being able to derive and create new subject classes here. So that's the idea here, okay? And then again, you'll see that in our add observer that we are also going to be taking in anything that could be an observer. So we're going to be using our interface for observers. And our observer interface, again, is going to look something like this. We want to create this sort of interface here, again, consisting of these virtual, purely virtual functions here onNotify. And we do that in C++ with equals 0. Again, if you need review, check out my C++ series on that, but that's the idea. And then we'll just create some concrete class here, like watcher, which is something that's watching to see if anything interesting happening with the subject. So that's the basic idea. It'll just inherit from IObserver, and we want all the functionality here. All right, so that's the basic idea of what we're going to implement. Let's go ahead and get into this in some code. So let's go ahead and hop into our code and get ready to make some changes. And let me go ahead and clear our output just so that we don't have that as a distraction. I'll go ahead and move up here. And I want to go ahead and just start with our observer here because it's relatively easy to set up here. And again, I'm just going to come here and make this IObserver so that you can see that, again, this is going to be our abstract class, which we derive from. Or again, in sort of C++ terms, I should just call this our base class, okay, to make observers. Okay, so this is what we're going to start with on our second try here. So again, let's go ahead and set up our IObserver here. And again, for this one, I don't really need the constructor because, again, I want to make the point that this really isn't supposed to do anything here. But what I do want to make sure that folks do implement is this onNotify function here. I'm just going to make this virtual void onNotify, and we set it equal to 0 here. And let's go ahead and get rid of all of our implementation here, so that it's no longer existent. And any time that we have an abstract class here, in case we are doing something, it is useful to just go ahead and make a virtual or the destructor virtual here. In the instance that we do decide to create maybe some sort of factory function where we can create other observers. Okay, so that's the idea here. Okay, so that's our IObserver. Let's go ahead and now create a concrete implementation of our IObserver. And again, I just chose a name here, like watcher would be something reasonable to create here. And the important part being that we derive from IObserver, so that it's something that's able to subscribe to, as a way to think of it, or just watch subjects for changes. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and create a constructor here. So go ahead and create the watcher constructor. And we are going to take in a string here. And let's just go ahead and initialize it, something like this. And let's give it some actual data here to keep track of the name of our watcher. Again, just to give us a little bit of output here so that we can do something interesting with our watcher. And I'm going to make this constructor, has one parameter, explicit. If I can spell it right, explicit. There we are. All right. So that's the basic idea with our watcher. Now at this point, again, let me go ahead and just compile this to make a point here. Well, let's see if we made any mistakes. A couple mistakes here that I'll have to fix here. Oh, I mean, there's a bunch of mistakes in our main, so let's actually get rid of our main. or comment it out for now. So we get rid of it here. And let's go ahead and run it and see how our compiler does for us. Oops, now I'll save. There we are. And if I compile, let's go ahead and see. Well, I guess our subject's going to be complaining. But the point that I want to make, or the thing that I want you to observe here as we're compiling, because we're getting a bunch of messages here, is one, to actually make our watcher here needs to implement this on notify. Now, since I guess I haven't created any concrete instantiations, GCC is not giving me any errors here. So let's just go ahead and create that function here, which I am overriding. So let's go ahead and override on notify. And I'm just going to have it print out the name here. So let's just go ahead and say watcher, and then I'll just put a hyphen, mname. Something like that should be fine. And an end line here. And it is nice if we do override here in C++ to indicate that we are overriding things. And depending on, let me actually put this in the right position here, override. I like to do it, you don't have to, but I think it's a good thing to be in the habit of. Okay, so that's our watcher class here that we have set up. So now let's go ahead and go through a similar translation here for our subject. Again, all we did previously for our observer is make this sort of an interface, and then one concrete instantiation here, and then we'll revisit this and fix any bugs that I have probably created. But anyways, let's go ahead and make this now an interface for our subject. And again, depending on how you want to structure this, you could have a constructor or whatever, virtual destructor I would recommend as we are implementing this. So let's go ahead and create a virtual destructor here. ISubject. Let's go ahead here. And then let's go ahead and make these functions. I'm going to make them virtual void so that they can be overridden in case there is something that we might want to do with how we remove the observer from the actual list. Why that could be interesting. Just kind of depends on what data structure we're using. So for example, if we have some data structure, if we choose a vector instead here, and we're adding duplicates, and maybe how we search to remove them starts from the front or the back, or removes all of the observers that may have been added twice or whatever. So that's the reason I'm going to make this virtual, in case you want the option to override this. Again, that usually makes sense in your base class to have things virtual. But at the very least, we want this functionality, and for now, this is going to be our underlying data structure. Again, you can play around with this in your implementation to meet your needs. Okay, and then now all I really have to do here for our subject here is create a class, and I'm just going to call this SomeSubject here to again demonstrate that we are going to make it a type of subject here. So let's go ahead and create that here. And this isn't really going to do anything. Again, maybe we want to add some functionality or some different state into the subject, but for now, this is all that we're going to have here. Now, the one thing, again, before I forget, for our subject, let's go ahead and make sure that it can take in any type of observer. So again, using our interface. So I'm just going to quickly put in IObserver before I run this. And we've got our subject here. And with that said, let's go ahead and give this a compile, and miraculously have not made any bugs yet. So again, here is our subject here, which we will derive all of our other subjects from, and here's an example. So not really anything changed here with our subject. So now let's actually make use of this in this code here. And this time, what I'm going to go ahead and do for our subject here is we'll create the actual concrete type here. So let's go ahead and make this SomeSubject, and that's going to be our subject. And then we have our observers here that we can create. But as we have done here, these are now not observer, but we're going to substitute observer with watcher, which is the concrete class that we have created here. So that's the basic idea. And let's just go ahead and give these the same name to match here. Oops, there we are. Let's just go ahead and do a quick substitution here. And this is lowercase o. So there we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a, just need to fix a few of these spellings here. Watcher. And we'll go ahead and do that as well. For these ones, observer is now lowercase watcher. And one more time, a substitution there. Okay, so that looks pretty good for me. Let's give it a quick compile. It looks like it's running here. And let's give it a run here. And as I run it here, well, we get the same exact behavior as before. This time, though, the difference is that our subject, our concrete class, is using this interface here. So now I'm able to create different types of subjects that could be observable by different types of observers. Again, as long as they have this interface and their onNotify function implemented here. Okay, so that's the basic idea here for what we've done with this code. So now let's go ahead and think for a moment about if we like this implementation. So I'll go ahead and again, give you a quick walkthrough and just think about some of the design decisions here that we have. Again, we have this nice interface here, relatively simple for our observer. And again, we might want to add different functionality or whatever here, and that's fine. And we have our watcher demonstrating how we can make use of this base class or this abstract class, depending on what language background you're coming from, but in C++, this is our base class. Here's our interface again for our subject, which we made use of, again, using the same underlying data structure, but now any type of observer, or perhaps even different types of observers, can subscribe to this subject. So that's something kind of important to note. That's interesting. And then, of course, now we have our example, which works functionally the same. So with that said, let's go ahead and think about this and go ahead and give yourself a moment to pause, review that code, write it out, and think about this. Is this implementation of our observer pattern, is it flexible, maintainable? Is it something that we can extend? And hopefully you took a moment to pause the video there and really think about this. But here were some of my thoughts that I've, thought about. But the basic idea is, is this flexible? It's getting there. It's quite nice in the way that we can now derive different classes. And as I mentioned, it's particularly interesting if you can have many different types of observers subscribe to a particular subject, again, with different functionality or things that happen when they notify, as long as they're inheriting from that base class. And additionally, this is a little bit more maintainable in the sense that I just have this abstract class or this interface, and then the changes that are made can be propagated through the other classes, if that's the intent, or what sort of things need to happen with your observers or subscribers. So that tends to be a good thing. And really the point that I want to beat against where the improvement was making this extensible just by using inheritance. So no longer would we have to have matching pairs of lots of concrete classes. I would argue this is a good use of inheritance when we're able to say that this is a type of something and then take advantage of that in a collection. Of course, taking advantage of C++ is ability with polymorphism. So that's the basic idea, that again, having different types of observers that can subscribe to a subject. I think that's a really good thing. But I'm not going to end the series here, though. So I think this is a pretty good implementation, and this might meet a lot of folks' needs, in fact, of how you can do most of your stuff with observers before you might need to improve this for other various reasons or to give yourself more power. So with that said, folks, we are going to continue talking about the observer. I think this is sort of pushing folks towards the classic observer pattern, but there are some other things that we're going to want to talk about, like, again, trying to figure out from our subscriber, or excuse me, our subject's point of view, I should say, or the publisher, the other way to call it, is what if we don't want to notify all of our observers? How are we going to sort of keep track of that? And I'll provide at least one way to do that in the upcoming lessons here. So make sure, as always, you subscribe so you don't miss those. And with that said, folks, if you made it all the way through this video, thanks for your time and attention. Feel free to leave some comments below if you have some other thoughts on the observer. And then we'll get into some more issues into the later parts of this series about saying even registering the observers, which might be important, and so forth. So anyway, with that said, folks, thanks for your time and attention, and I'll see you again in the next lesson.